Thank you for coming to Poland.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, quite the trip from the US. How many of you are founders? Okay.
It's a big group of founders.
Quite a lot. All right, great. So Raj here has founded 10 companies, sold 8. And initially when I read it, I thought you're like a startup factory, building and selling. But then when we spoke on Saturday, you mentioned that at the last 2 companies you spent the last 20 years. And JumpCloud you've been building for the last 13 years. So 2 questions here. What is JumpCloud and why is she the one?
Yeah, so, well, thank you for having me. It's great to be in Poland. Bartek's had me here a couple times, so it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for coming. So basically, JumpCloud is IT infrastructure software. So the simple way to think about it is when you log into your machine, application, cloud infrastructure, anything that you need access to when you're at work, we're sitting behind the scenes making sure that you have the right access and it's safe and secure for you to access that technology and those resources. So there's really 2 parts to our business. One is, we're enabling companies to be productive with technology. So hopefully, able to accomplish more, work faster, work better, and especially in the age of AI. And then second is security. So the number one way that companies get compromised or breached is because of identities. And basically, those identities get compromised, and that's how people get in. So we're sort of this interesting combination of how companies are productive, but how they stay safe. And then you asked the question of why is this company interesting? Essentially, so in our market, basically there's one player who dominates, which is Microsoft, and they own about 90-95% of the market share. This is back in 2013 when we started, and we just believed that was an opportunity because customers didn't have choice. And we wanted them to have choice in how they could run their IT infrastructure. And so with cloud infrastructure today, people use Macs, people use Google, they use Amazon, they use all kinds of different things. Well, Microsoft doesn't really want you to do that. So we wanted to enable companies to have whatever choice they wanted.
Cool. And we briefly spoke on Saturday. And one thing that struck me, like building a company for 13 years, we've been at it at Tylko for 11 years. You kind of have like tech debt and legacy. And obviously now in the age of AI first companies operate very differently. So what's your thought process on this? Are you reinventing yourselves because of this? And like, what's the optimistic scenario? What's the negative scenario with the AI rollout?
I think every company that's been around sort of pre-AI, who's not AI native, we're all trying to become AI native. So, there's so many benefits to leveraging AI. Obviously, we can go faster. And we happen to have a very big AI opportunity. So if you think about how do you connect AI to your corporate IT systems so that AI is more productive, that's our personal opportunity for the future. So I think the scenario for us is it actually increases our TAM pretty tremendously. So, the optimistic case is we build a bigger business, a better business. Obviously, the downside scenario is we don't take advantage of this opportunity. We don't take advantage of AI and accelerate the business. And I think every company on the planet needs to figure out how to take advantage of it. So I think that process of if you're not AI native, to become AI native is something that everybody's going to have to go through.
Can you share some specifics on how you try to transform the mindset, tech stack in your company?
Yeah, and by the way, we don't have any proprietary answers here because it's a really hard thing. And the hard thing is that you're changing a culture, you're changing how people operate and how they work. And for those of us that have been in the workplace for a while, that's not easy, right? Like everybody knows that change is hard. And so the things that we've done are all the things that you would expect. We've done training, we've done hackathons, we've created awards and incentives, we've tried to highlight, kind of great use cases internally. We've done everything that we think we can think of to try and bring people along to become AI native. And you also have to have a team that is forward-leaning, that wants to learn, that wants to change, that wants to embrace AI. And ultimately, if you don't have those kinds of people, it's very hard to get there. So you've got to figure out how do you build that into your culture.
Okay. Yeah, it's I guess a challenge all of us are facing.
And even AI native companies have a lot of challenges. They're dealing with a lot of growth. Not all of them are using the technology, right? So it's not easy any which way.
So a few days ago, you were in Paris playing on the courts of Roland Garros.
Not as a competitor.
Of course, but still, what is that all about?
Yeah, it's so I've been very fortunate. I have a couple friends who play at a very high level. They're professional tennis players. So I spent some time with them, supporting them to go and try and win in a very difficult competition. But it's fun to be there to support them, and I get to do that and have that experience. And there's a lot of parallels to what we do as entrepreneurs, I'm sure as investors, and to be the best at what you do requires so much effort and training. And I think it's nice to see a different dimension that's at the same sort of, you're trying to be great and you're trying to be at the best in the world, but what they need to do is very similar. How much training they have, how they focus on fundamentals, and the focus, the attention, the discipline. Those are all really good things for me to see and for us to learn as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, so many parallels between competitive sport and entrepreneurship. So you raised a ton of money, like almost $500 million. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you have many investors. How many of you have raised external funding? If you could raise your hands. Okay, about half of the audience. And those investors tend to have their plans and ideas for you. So what's your advice for managing those different stakeholders, different incentives in a company?
Yeah, I think everybody hopes that investor relationships are going to be easy and great, and the truth is that investors have their interests of what they want, and we as founders and the company have our interests of what we want to do, and sometimes those things align, and that's what you try and work towards, is making sure that they align, but sometimes they don't align. And especially at a company that's now been around 13 years, in our case, not all the incentives are going to align. So we've got some very early stage investors who may want to exit, who may want to do different things. And I think one of the things that I talk to a lot of founders about is making sure that you're very clear about what your goals and intentions are, and making sure that your investor set knows that. But one of the core problems, or one of the core things that I say is, an investor's problems are not your problems, right? And your problems aren't necessarily the investor's problems, but the key is to focus on what you think is the right thing to do and be very clear about that. But just because a fund wants to sell or they want to do something different doesn't necessarily mean that that's your problem to go deal with that. And I think that's an important thing for founders to realize.
And how can you best manage that?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not easy. It depends on a whole bunch of factors. How big is the ownership stake? How many board seats do they have? All of those things are a key part of that. But I think ultimately you want to have an honest conversation about where you're at in the business, where they're at in their fund, and trying to map. And it's not an adversarial conversation, but it's a clarity conversation of, just because an investor wants to do something doesn't mean that that's your problem to go solve that.
Yeah, when we spoke over the phone, you mentioned that it's best to have an independent board. Usually when you grow the company, you raise several rounds, then your board becomes basically consisting of the investors that you raised money from. So how do you exchange your board and how do you make it work? Asking for a friend?
Yeah. Look, I think long term, our focus has to be on the company's success, right? Not on the founder's success, not on the investor's success, on the company's success. Because if the company wins, then everybody ultimately will win. And I fundamentally believe that an independent board that is only focused on the company's success is the right thing long term. Now, early on, that's very hard to do because, maybe seed stage, Series A, it is going to be a very founder and investor driven board. But quickly thereafter, once it starts to get product market fit, once it sort of hits the Endeavor stage where you have Endeavor involved in things like that, you want to have an independent board. You want to have people who are from the industry, who understand how to grow businesses, how to help make them successful, and they are truly focused on the success of the business, because that's going to be the right thing for the company, the shareholders, employees, everybody. And that is the challenge, over time, is how do you make that transition? But your investors should want that transition because it's going to be better for the company. So at some point you have to stop adding more board seats that are from investors, and you have to start saying, no, we're going to do independence. And then over time, you also have to exchange a seed stage board member or a Series A stage board member into an independent. And that's hard to do because people don't want to give up their board seats. But those seed stage and Series A investors, after you've raised $500 million or you're at scale, they aren't as helpful as some other folks, and they have to realize that. So that's a tough conversation, but it's an important conversation for the success of the business.
Great, yeah. Looking forward to that conversation.
Not easy.
So you mentioned becoming an Endeavor stage company, and how long have you been with Endeavor?
So I've been an Endeavor entrepreneur for about 5-6 years.
Okay, and how many companies have you acquired at JumpCloud?
So we've acquired seven companies at JumpCloud.
Okay, so you acquired 7 companies. You're now, give or take, a $3 billion business?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. What role does Endeavor play in your day-to-day operations and life as an entrepreneur?
So Bartek actually talked about a lot of the things where he said there's a lot of curated conversations, and that's all true. We get access to a number of folks to help us with whatever challenges we may have. But I think the one really unique one that we've leveraged that I'm not sure how many Endeavor companies have, but I would encourage them to, is we bought companies in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Brazil, and in India. We actually haven't bought a company that's sort of based in the US. And in all but the India category, we were able to have those Endeavor offices help us with the acquisition. So for instance, in Turkey, we were having a lot of trouble getting a deal done with the investor on the other side. So the Endeavor team knew the investor, so they were able to intervene on our behalf and start to get the ball moving again, and we were able to get that deal done. I think in large part because of the MD there and her ability to engage with that investor. And then in other places, in Lebanon, for instance, we don't know the first thing about how to operate from a tax, finance, compliance, HR perspective there. And that was an important set of learnings that we needed to have, and they connected us with a number of people and companies to help us. And the same thing happened in Brazil. In Brazil, they happened to know some of the founders, so we were able to get back channel references on the founders and the business. So these are just sort of really interesting things that, I don't know if we went into Endeavor thinking that would happen, but the fact that it did happen made Endeavor incredibly valuable to us.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard of this kind of support before talking to you about it, so I think it's really gives me a new view on what Endeavor could be in our journey. I want to ask about your internal motivation. So 10 companies, you're a rich guy at this point. Why do you want to go to work and deal with people's shit and challenges? And how many people are at your company now?
We have about 1,000.
1,000 people, so 1,000 problems. And
hopefully 1,000 opportunities to do great work. Right?
Also, great. Glass half full kind of guy. Great. No, but what's your internal drive, and what's your also kind of thought process when making a decision to do the work? What's happening in your head?
Yeah, I think the motivation for me has very much been on solving problems. So I think the problem we're solving is a really interesting problem. It's a meaningful problem. It's a difficult problem. So the question is, how can I put all the pieces together? And I've always said it's sort of like a 3-dimensional puzzle that's constantly moving that I'm trying to put together. And that's sort of what's in my head on on what I'm trying to do. And that to me is really a lot of fun. It gives me a lot of energy. I enjoy doing it. So that's sort of the internal motivation is, can I figure this out? Can I solve these problems in a way that hopefully nobody else can? And that's sort of the drive and the motivation.
And how would you describe yourself as a leader? Like, what's your methods? How do you approach people? Who do you like working with? Who you don't like working with? There's 100 ways to do it, so I wonder what's yours?
Everybody has to find their own way of doing it, and I agree there's tons of different leadership models and a lot of different ways to do it. For me, I always enjoy being in it with the team. So I've got to feel like, I can sit down and work with the team. I want to be involved with them, helping them succeed and understanding it. So I don't want them to ever feel like I'm just sort of raining down, demands or things that need to be done. It's more of like, no, let's come to it together and I'll help you solve some of those problems. I'll get on the road and spend time with customers or partners or our team and do those things. And I think that's my method. It's sort of what works in our company, is sort of being in it with the team. And then I think that builds a lot of respect. It builds a lot of conviction that people know that this is the right thing to do and they want to work at it, and because you're involved in it. So that's a little bit of my leadership style.
Okay, thanks for sharing. And you're based in Dallas, right?
Based in Dallas.
Yeah, so what's the backstory of that? I mean, no offense to Dallas, but it's not Silicon Valley, it's not New York.
That's right.
And you've built a big, great business out of there. So why? And what's your advice on building companies that are not in like the startup capitals for the founders from Warsaw, which is also kind of off the beaten path in terms of European tech so far?
Yeah, look, I think great companies can be built anywhere. So it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley anymore. I mean, I think the tagline for Endeavor is elsewhere. And I think that's totally true, especially now. So my company is remote first. So we have about 1,000 people, and we don't require anybody to come into offices. So we have offices, but we don't have people go in. And so, from our perspective, we've built a whole culture, a whole operating methodology that's around remote first. So, we want people the best people, and we don't really care where they are. So that's been our philosophy and why we've been able to build from. Our company is technically headquartered in Colorado, but we started in Colorado. We were, before COVID, in office, and then once COVID hit, we made a decision that we were going to go remote, and we were never going to look back. And so we have been very clear with our team that we will not change. We will do everything we can to make remote, function as well as it can. And we've been able to do that. And for me, the move to Dallas was very much a personal one. With my family, we decided to move to Dallas. But Dallas is a great location for me to travel from. There is a lot of business there, but again, we're remote, so it doesn't really matter where I am or the team is. And again, going back to how we lead and how we work, one of our core values is called build connections. And so that's a core part of who we are, is we're trying to build connections. And when you try and do that remotely, it's not easy. But if you can do that, it's a meaningful connection.
Across how many countries is your team?
We're in 20 countries, and I think probably every state in the United States. So it's a pretty dispersed team.
Very impressive. All right. I would like to invite the audience to also ask some questions. I'm sure something popped in your mind during this conversation. So yeah, if you could raise your hand if you have one.
Well, a lot of them are very different, right? So different times, different situations. I think, ultimately the fundamentals are always the case, right? You have to have great fundamentals. If you want an exit and outcome that's going to be a meaningful outcome, whatever it is, whether you're acquired or IPO, you just have to have a great business. So focusing on the fundamentals, I think, I've been through many cycles. So I've been through the dot-com cycle, the cycle around the Great Recession, like all these different cycles. And I've also seen the hype cycles of, the internet, cloud, now AI. So, and I think we always sort of forget that businesses have to have great fundamentals long term. And it happens on the downside or the upside. So I think the most surprising thing to me is how people forget that. But I think if we can stay focused on, you got to build a business that's, has a great product. It serves a need in the market, and it's a big enough need in the market. You've got to figure out how you have economics that make money over time. Like these are sort of very basic things, but you'd be amazed at how quickly people forget them. And especially right now, you're seeing that people are chasing these AI valuations, and they're forgetting about a lot of those fundamentals. And I think that's one of the big risks right now, especially for investors, I would say, is if you lose sight of, can these businesses really make money in the long term? You could be in for, a lot of losses, right? So, and by the way, that happened in the internet cycle, it happened during, kind of the SaaS bubble, like all these times it's happened. Are you talking about internally? How do we get people focused on the right metrics?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and actually, we do a lot internally to talk about where the company's heading. So we have every quarter, twice a quarter, we're talking to the company about kind of results and where we're at. And as part of that, we actually have North Star metrics. So we have 5 North Star metrics that we put up every 6 weeks, and we're showing people where we are tracking against those things. And for us, it's very simple. They're things like, growth in our revenue, free cash flow, product NPS, internal NPS, so employee net promoter score. And then in our case, we have AI utilization and efficiency as well. But these are, very basic, very simple. I think they're things that people can understand. And one of the hopes is that people can very quickly understand from what they're working on, how that connects to 1 or 2 or 3 or more of those North Star metrics. Yeah, great. So let me take the second question first, and I'll come back to building connections. So in terms of M&A, I think the philosophy that we have is we always believe that there's a lot of people who have a lot of value to offer us. So I think, when you think about our business, and we've been so global and so working on remote, a fundamental viewpoint is that we think there's talent everywhere. So same thing from a company context. We think that there's other companies out there who've probably built some great things that we could leverage and utilize. And we're probably most interested in technology that could help us, that we can distribute to our customers. So that's sort of the primary interest. But in some cases, the technology may not fit with us, but the people are great, and they could rebuild something with us. And now we've also become interested in if there's customers that we could acquire, and then we could sell more of our products to. We would love to do that. But I would say in general, the philosophy is that we think there's a lot of people in the world that have built some really great things, and we could learn from that, and we could bring those in and accelerate our business. So I hope that our team doesn't have a viewpoint that starts with, we can always do it better. I hope the viewpoint is really, hey, there's a lot of great opportunity out there, and how could we potentially leverage that? Let's find the value in that. And then obviously getting to a deal and getting that done is very hard. But if you have that philosophy, generally, I believe that you have an opportunity to get a deal done. Hope that helps on that one. The first one is building connections in a remote environment. I think that's the core question. And it's not easy. So you have to be incredibly intentional. So it starts with, kind of the interview process. We probably interview more widely to try and create those internal connections and try and create some pull for that candidate. So if that candidate does join, then they've already got kind of a bunch of people who know them and who are excited about them joining, and they've met them, and hopefully they pulled for them to get hired. So it starts there, but then we have a very intentional process. We have a mentor and a buddy, if you will. We want them talking to each other. We have classes that meet, an onboarding class meets regularly for about 6 weeks. So they meet for the first week, pretty actively, and then after that on a sort of every few days or every week basis. So those are the kinds of things that you're doing to build connections. And then ultimately we do in-person events and things like that to bring people together, because that's really important too. But you have to be very intentional about it. And there's ways to do it. It's just, you have to think about what those are. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I hope that the best exits are the ones when we're not looking, right? And somebody knocks on our door and says, hey, we really love what you're building, and we would love to potentially acquire it, right? That's sort of the best case, I think, outcome. And that's happened a few times. It doesn't always happen that way. And in other cases, we may want to sell for whatever reason. And those are harder transactions to get done. And ultimately the hope is that you've built a great business and somebody comes knocking. And I think with JumpCloud in particular, we have a very long-term vision of what we want to build. Now, if somebody does become interested, great, we can have that conversation. But we have a mission that we're on, and we're very confident in our mission. We're pretty excited about our mission. So whether somebody else wants to be on the journey with us or they want us to join their journey, I think we don't care, right? It's we want to go build what we want to build, and then if something happens, we'll evaluate it whenever it occurs. Yeah, I think everybody has a different balance and a different set of priorities in their lives, right? So, but I think really thinking about what those are and what's meaningful for you is really important. So for instance, my family is very, very important to me. Health is very important to me, and work's really important to me. I've narrowed my focus to those 3 areas that I really deeply care about. So am I gonna go out with my friends on Friday night or Saturday night? No, I'm probably not, right? I'm gonna spend my time with my family. And so those are the trade-offs and choices that I make, because you do have limited time, you have a limited capacity to do things. And work does take up a tremendous amount of my capacity. So I've just over the years learned that these are the things that matter to me, and those are where I'm going to prioritize my time. And I'm going to be really strong about saying no to anything outside of that. So I'm sure I miss out on things that other people may enjoy and things like that, but I've focused on my core 3 things, and those are the most important things to me in my life at this point in time. Now that may change over time, but and then I have a great partner, and she supports me, I support her. She's got a pretty demanding job herself, so that's a lot for us to juggle. But we've both sort of figured out what's important to us, and we're very focused on those things. Yeah, great question. So we spend quite a bit of time in group settings. So as a leadership team, there's probably 3-4 hours a week that we're together in various formats. And then I don't do a lot of one-on-ones, but not for the same reasons as Jensen talks about. I actually think one-on-ones are actually really, really valuable to do. So, but what I do is I talk to whoever the person is that I'm working with, and I say, what works for you? Is it a one-on-one meeting each week? Is it just ad hoc calls? Is it a document that we share what we're working on? So I try and adapt my function or role with that person to whatever's best for them. Because obviously I want them to succeed. I want to work in the way that's best for them. And I can adapt for what I need to get out of that conversation into whatever the format is. So I would say out of maybe 7 or 8 direct reports that I have, so I don't have a lot of direct reports, there's probably like 2 that want a one-on-one every week, and most everybody we're talking via phone, text, email on a regular basis, but it's sort of short and it's more maybe episodic conversations. And then if there's something more strategic that we need to discuss, then usually that's a group decision or group discussion, and we just get the group together. Well, I mean, there's so many things. It's hard to even comprehend that, because my first business was 30 some years ago, and I was still in college. So we started our first business when I was still in school. So it's hard to compare those things. But I think the things that probably are really powerful at any age, with any experience, are having a lot of drive, a lot of passion, a lot of conviction. I think even at the age I'm at today, I want to have that belief that I can do something that everybody else says you can't do, right? And as a young person, that belief is almost always there, which is great, right? I mean, those are the things that you want to harness and try and use. And then the things that you would love to have then is the wisdom and experience that you have now, right? You've been through so many things, you've had many issues, many problems, things have gone wrong, lots of things have gone wrong. You would love to have that wisdom and experience when you're building your company, and when you first start. But the truth is that you don't have that. We had lots of advisors, we had lots of investors, we had lots of people around us. But even with all of that, there is this sort of naivete of youth that you're going to have to go through some of those things. So as much as we'd like to say apply that then, I'm not sure if that person would have listened to those things either, right? So, but I think the things that are consistent for entrepreneurs, we have tremendous drive, tremendous passion. There's a lot of energy to go build something and create, and those are great. That's the way, this as an entrepreneur, right? So those things make all the difference on whether you're going to be successful or not. Yeah, I think, the problem is the word balance sort of immediately tells people that it's equal, right? And it's not equal, right? We spend more time at work than we do with our families, unfortunately, and that's really something that is very difficult to change. And especially for founders who are incredibly motivated and excited about what they're building, it's almost impossible to say balance, because balance sort of indicates sort of equal parts. And I think integration is probably a much better word. It's not the popular word on that particular topic. But I think that your second part of your question was really, how do you communicate that to the team and how does that work for me? I think, again, it goes back to asking people to go find what works for them, and really saying, spend the time to know yourself so that you know what that work-life integration looks like for you, and then go execute on that. Because if you execute on that, you're probably going to be better at work and you're probably going to be better at home, and that's going to probably yield a better result for both sides. Well, Brad and I have built almost all my companies together. So I've known Brad for now, I guess, 32 years or something like that. So his first investment as an investor was my first company. So the Startup Community's book and his concepts are very meaningful to me. And as you were talking earlier, I was really thinking about what would sort of some of my thoughts be around Poland and what's going on here. I think the world has changed, and the fact that you can build a great company and a great business from anywhere is absolutely true, and I don't think anybody should tell you otherwise. I also think that going global right away is probably really important. If you can figure out a model depending on your business, if you can go global. For our business, we could go global right away. Made a huge difference. We were already sensitive to the global community and what people needed. We had customers, we now have customers in 160 countries. So, that's a really powerful thing. And there's no reason that many companies in Poland can't go global pretty quickly. So I think that's incredible. I think the idea of you investing in Polish companies, I think bringing in capital, I think the key is just start as many companies as you can, try and figure out different pockets of opportunity. And if they're great businesses, they are going to attract capital, they are going to be successful, and that's going to build on the cycle. And that's really what Startup Communities was about. I mean, all of you are experienced, you have a lot to offer. Every single person can help these companies grow and be successful. Those founders can give back. The employees at those companies can go start new companies. That's sort of the multiplier effect of Endeavor. So an Endeavor as a community, remember, it's a nonprofit whose only goal is to help companies succeed. And those companies that succeed then are giving back into the communities, the country, the regions. That's incredible. And the fact that Linda had that vision as the CEO of Endeavor Global, I think is incredible. It's such an altruistic vision that she has to help all these communities in places that don't have the same resources as Silicon Valley, I think is incredible. So I think you in Poland have such a big opportunity. You've got some great companies that are starting to merge. I would say double down, go harder, go faster, continue to build and build as quickly as you can, because there's no reason that you guys can't build some amazing companies that are going to transcend your economy and really raise the stature of Poland in the sort of global tech community.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with us and coming over here. Please give it up for Raj.
Thank you.